There is a plethora of media which contains trilogies and the works of masterminds and their creations. With this comes popular examples such as Star Wars, Toy Story, Kung Fu Panda, Spider-Man, and Back to the Future, just to name a few. Yet, one of the most noteworthy, and sometimes forgotten about, is also one of the ones which I respect most highly, and which I deem as the Magnum Opus of Trilogies. And if you've read the title and seen the thumbnail, I don't think there's any guessing needed, unless somehow you stumbled on this video randomly, or got put on autoplay, I guess. Lord of the Rings. Not only a mastercraft novel, but an amazing set of movies which were lovingly made in detail, and was a respectful and amazing adaptation on the big screen. There have been many videos discussing how this trilogy has impacted modern cinema, and although I most likely will be among those voices, I'd also like to share my own personal thoughts and how the series has impacted my life. Now, before we begin, I will say, like many, I watch Lord of the Rings on almost a yearly basis. I, however, am still reading through the books. This is my first time going through them, and I'm currently on Return of the King, and have really enjoyed myself seeing the deeper side of Tolkien's lore, as well as learning some of the side stories that are included, not in the movies. So take that with a grain of salt if there's some mega fans that don't agree with everything I say or correct me on things that I get wrong. I'm a fan as well and deeply love this series, so I hope I don't do too bad of a job today. Lord of the Rings is a journey, no pun intended, through a diverse and complex land which takes course through 3 separate novels, as well as 3 movies which I absolutely adore. Each of them is so contrasted from one another in terms of visual storytelling, set design, location, and talent, that it always amazes me to come back to this series. Like many, I grew up with these movies as a kid, and after my first time watching them, fell in love for not only the world Tolkien has made and the characters, but honestly the soundtrack, as well as the videography that this series has. It's so recognizable and masterfully done, and gives me goosebumps even to this day at certain points through the films. But I digress. The main reason that Lord of the Rings stands out from other trilogies is the care and attention to detail that Peter Jackson took when adapting this book. This wasn't a simple cash grab, as many movies are nowadays, but this was a project that he was passionate about, someone who wanted to adapt this series faithfully, and put time and money into this project to make it succeed to the extent that it did. When you look back at the beginning of The Lord of the Rings, it took them 6 years of development before filming to make sure that everything was accounted for, and planned for the fullest. This included set design, location checks, and securing the necessary funds to adapt a 3-movie deal. But enough about the logistics of Lord of the Rings. Let's talk about the feelings and the real reason we enjoy this series so much. We begin like the books begin. In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. We start with hobbits in the Shire, a joyful, nostalgic place of serenity for the people who live here, where there's always the expectation of good food, good drinks, overall a place of rest and comfort for those who are weary, and a place we all feel oddly at home with. Maybe because it's of the music, maybe the natural nature of the area, or maybe because of the simple idea that here in Hobbiton, there is peace. We are introduced to the characters of Gandalf, Frodo, Bilbo, and Sam, some of the foundations of this universe, and the people we will spend the most time with. With this introduction, we also learn about the magic in the world of Middle-earth and the wizards, although they have a much different interpretation and duty than many would expect, especially here in the Shire where Gandalf is considered a traveling merchant of sorts, someone who comes and goes and are friends with the hobbits, bringing firework, and enjoying them alongside. As the story goes on, we get to explore towns such as Bree, where the half-folk and human live alike. This is also the fateful meeting with Aragorn and their journeys into the wilderness, from the wind-strewn plains of Weathertop all the way to their supposed journey end at Rivendell. Aragorn is another key character which we all come to love throughout the series. Simply introduced at the beginning of the series as Strider, he defies expectations as we continue to learn about his heart, rather than the outside appearance of a ragged and dangerous Dunedain from the north. And here it is at Rivendell, where we meet our main cast of characters. Legolas, Gimli, Boromir, Aragorn, and of course Gandalf, Merry, and Pippin. This is when I'd consider the story to really begin in a way. In Fellowship of the Rings, the first book's half is much more detail and description oriented about world building, and convoluted with side stories such as Tom Bombadil and the journeys of the hobbits to Rivendell. However, in part 2 of Book 1, our main cast of characters has finally been introduced and set up to begin our journey. This is when we learn more about Boromir and the dwellings of Gondor in the south. We are able to understand more about Aragorn as well, and his role as both Strider and rightful heir to the king. Gimli and Legolas both act as supporting roles in this first movie, but also gain a greater fandom for their personality and the moments that they have together. And as the movies comedically put it, we only see Legolas and Frodo have one conversation together, which I find to be very entertaining.
And you have my bow.
The journey continues through mountains and mines, losing dear friends and gaining new, as our groups continue to travel through forests and terrain all throughout Middle-earth. The magic of Middle-earth was not only in part due to author's masterful work and writing, but also in Middle-earth itself. New Zealand was meant for Middle-earth, and Middle-earth found its home in New Zealand. A perfect pair tied together to create a master story which spans all 3 books and movies. As the Fellowship disbanded at the end of Book 1, we are then led into the adventures of 2, almost 3 dividing stories which tell one overall epic, the tale of the Lord of the Rings. We are introduced to villains and heroes that arise throughout these stories, and we see the duality of man and temptation. Not only this, but I love each book and movie for how different they are. When I think of Fellowship of the Rings, I think of greens and blues as a color scheme. The Two Towers has the faded grays and blues of Frodo's and Sam's journey. Meanwhile, Pippin and Merry are faced with danger in Fangorn Forest, with Treebeard in the vents, along with the Battle of Isengard at the Dark Tower. And finally, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, along with Gandalf and the Riders of Rohan, in their yellow and muted green fields beneath the large snow-capped mountains. Each is an interwoven art piece, which is amazingly done and crafted to the finest details. I love everything about Middle-earth, from the music to the characters that we meet along the way, and the simplicity, yet complexity of good versus evil, and the world building that went on in Tolkien's mind to create such an impressive and thought-out fantasy epic. It's not something that most could accomplish, let alone write out. Yet, somehow it was done. Lord of the Rings is more than just any fantasy fairy tale. It's a devotion to real storytelling, without some of the gimmicks that you would see in children's literature, such as dwarfs and elves and the differences in Tolkien's work compared to other interpretations. It's a well thought out and unique story which has stood the test of time and has impacted modern stories and the fantasy genre to this day. When I think of Lord of the Rings, it is by far my favorite trilogy of all time. It's better crafted than many, and simply put, it's nostalgic. It gives me the feeling of home. I feel comfort when hearing the music of the Shire, journeying to Bree, Weathertop, or Rohan and Gondor. I love the buildup of adventures and heroics, seeing the battles of Helm Deep and the climax at Mount Doom. I get emotional at simple words by the end of the series, but also love rewatching them over and over again for the very same reason. And I love the characters that were portrayed so well throughout the films. Lord of the Rings was a perfect combination of the right timing as well as the right passion behind a project, telling one coherent story throughout with deep, comprehensive characters that you feel for and journey with. YouTube has a recently new change of creating polls for people to vote on certain topics, and many times when I see a poll asking about the best movies of all time or best series of all time, if Lord of the Rings isn't listed and is replaced with like DC or Marvel, many fans in the comments have the most liked messages talking about how Lord of the Rings is the ultimate series. And I have to agree. This is a series that I have returned back on again and again and again. There's nostalgia playing one portion of this role, but also how well done everything about this series is. It feels refreshing to start over, and has a fulfilling and dramatic climax, which many would consider is one of the best films in all of history. There is a reason it's won so many awards and amassed that popularity behind this, because Lord of the Rings is the magnum opus of trilogies. Thank you.